Chapter 6 Honoring Our Emotions. "Why do you beg?" the king asked the beggar. "I beg," he replied, "so that others can feel like kings." The Cosmic Game.
I recall an experience I had in Thailand. It should give you a feel for holding on to the emotions and stopping the thoughts that are attached to them. My spouse and I were visiting the Grand Palace in Bangkok. It was a very hot day. The energy of the place was overwhelming. There were crowds of tourists. They were posing with the statues, sometimes in non-respectful ways. It seemed that their energies added to the distress I was feeling. It did not blend with the powerful spiritual energy of the palace. I needed to get out of there. We tried to find our way outside to catch a taxi. The exit we found was not where the taxis were picking up tourists. The traffic was clogged, and the smell of the petrol fumes was increasing my distress. Those who have been to Thailand know that when a taxi is available, a red light is lit on the passenger's side. We could see long columns of traffic approaching. All had their red lights off. Taxis were slowly passing us, all filled with their fare. Suddenly, we spotted one lonely red light coming towards us. As we were hurrying to catch it, a tourist couple arrived first and entered it. I was filled with dismay. The taxi started inching slowly forward in our direction. As it neared us, the couple suddenly got out of the car, appearing annoyed. I grabbed the door and took advantage of our newfound luck. We got into the taxi quickly. I gave the driver our hotel address. He quoted a sum that was significantly more than what it would cost generally. I quickly understood why the red light was left on. If it were taken off, the meter would be running. Legally, he could only charge the meter fare. I did not care. I simply wanted to get out of there and back to the hotel. I actually thought that fate had brought this taxi to me. Gradually, things began to settle down within me. I realized why the previous couple had got out of the cab. They did not want to participate in dishonest behavior. The cab driver appeared surly as well. As I became less overwhelmed, I started focusing on my emotions. I identified and connected with my emotions. I slowed down all thoughts that were running through my mind. I suddenly experienced an overwhelming sense of shame. Immediately, my mind kicked into gear. I began coming up with reasons for this shame. I felt shame because I did not have the courage to stand up to the dishonest behavior of the driver. I remember struggling to get out of the analysis. I just kept trying to feel the emotion. I held on to the shame. It was a struggle. A sense of peace and love gently awoke in me. With it came understanding. There was a clear message that I should not judge the driver. At the same time, I was shown the reason why. This man was ashamed that he would not have enough money to give his daughter a presentable wedding and dowry. His own shame was guiding him to act this way. Suddenly, something resolved in me. I felt grounded and peaceful. Spontaneously, the driver began laughing and chatting with us. I noticed that he got lost many times. He finally found our hotel. If the meter had been running in the first place, it would have come close to the same price that he charged us. I realized that when we do something for the wrong reasons, we do not gain from it in the end. A group of friends and I decided that we would work on connecting with our emotions. I recommended a few techniques. The goal of each was the same. It was to connect with the emotions and let go of the logic that followed. If you were able to do that for about 3 to 5 minutes, you would have altered states of consciousness. When I was doing that in the taxicab, of course, logic kept coming at me. This logic can be very seductive. I find that when I work at this, it becomes easier. As they say, practice something and you become better at it. Practice worry and your mind will worry more. Usually it starts with random thoughts entering the mind. At the start, you will find that you are trying to hold on to the emotions and you get lost. The next thing that you recognize is that your mind has been wandering. You forget to stay with your emotions. Do not judge yourself harshly. Simply go back to practice with patience and perseverance. I will keep repeating throughout the book these words. It is not how well you do something, but it is your will and determination to do it that will bring success. The next stage was that the random thoughts would lessen. However, with practice, unexpectedly, the thoughts would become seductive. I remember that suddenly, issues that I was struggling to solve would start expressing themselves. Random ideas of solutions would appear. Many times, this seduced me. I remember telling myself that just this once, I needed to figure out the solution. I realized that my mind was guiding me to sabotage the process. It was tempting me to avoid staying with the emotions alone. Let us work on negative emotions. These are much easier to identify. I will provide you a list of 7 emotional states to practice with. They are helpless, hopeless, sad, fear, guilt, worry, and anxiety. You will notice that the word anger is not included. Anger is a secondary emotion. It protects us from one of the 7 emotions above. It gives us a false sense of being in charge and in control. Just refuse to accept anger as a primary emotion. Ask yourself, which of the 7 emotions is hiding behind it? Moreover, see anger as a drop of poison in the bucket. The group found that just staying with the 7 emotions was initially challenging. It became hilarious. One person would write it down frequently and yet forget what they were. Others realized how they even described their emotions in an intellectual way. When asked about an emotion, they would make statements like, "I feel that he should not have done that to me." Gradually, they would recognize that it was not expressing an emotion, but a logical conclusion. It would become quite funny. We could see it in others easier than in ourselves. We would then try to connect with the 7 emotions. Others would start a debate about other emotions that were not on the list and negotiate that they be included. It was fascinating that the mind would resist such a simple instruction. The first insight was how committed the mind was to sabotage the process. This was because it was triggering emotions. Maya was at full play. I asked some young children to do the same task. They connected with the task very quickly. We would observe that children were performing better than us. A lot of humble pie was eaten. Gradually, another insight evolved. People began recognizing that irrespective of what emotion we called it, it somehow felt the same within our psyche. Depending on our life experiences, the brain was providing us with labels for how we were feeling. We were experiencing pieces of wisdom: helpless, hopeless, sad, guilt, fear, all felt the same within us. These concepts became truth. We did not have to justify them. We received a deeper understanding of the difference between knowledge and wisdom. In practice, the game kept playing out. We were chasing different balls of many colors. A pink ball might be a heightened sense of smell. We were drawn to our different senses rather than stay with the emotions. Because we were addressing negative emotions, we would tell ourselves to stay with the dread. A startling revelation came to me one day. We always assume that when we feel a negative emotion, something wrong is going to happen. I heard this inner voice ask me, "What if this perception is wrong?" The voice continued, "The divine is composed of all emotions. When we feel peaceful or blissful, we are in synchronicity with the divine. When we are having negative feelings, we are simply not synchronized. It is still the divine." As I was connecting with this, I also saw the image of me being carried by a powerful stream of water. I observed at times flowing with the current and feeling exhilarated. At other times, I was tossed around because I had lost my synchronicity with the water. It was still the same stream. I now tell myself, this is how divinity feels when I am out of sync with it. I stay with the feeling. I marvel that no matter how I feel, the wonder of the divine is what I am experiencing. Of course, logic challenges these perceptions. The more I practice, the easier it is becoming. Here are some suggestions that have worked for the group. As we practice one, the mind creates ways to sabotage the process. I found that when this was happening, I would switch to another technique. Breathing is a very powerful way to harness your thoughts. Pay attention to your breath as it enters and leaves the opening of your right nostril. Immediately, your breathing pattern is going to change. Nothing is wrong with that. Let it be. As thoughts enter the mind, let them drift away and return to focus on the breath. Observe the process as the breath flows in and out of the right nostril. With me, I found that the sensory stimulation I spoke about previously came into play. I began hearing the melody of the breath. There were times that the subtlest essences would appear. I recalled thinking that if I were to bottle this perfume, it would be a bestseller. I frequently caught myself trapped in this seductive thinking. I was already designing the containers. I would stop and return to observe my breath. Another technique was the one I called my somatic process. I would connect with the 7 emotions. I would first clarify which ones they were. I did not try to overanalyze. If there were only a faint suggestion of sadness, fear, or any of the others, I would accept those emotions as present. I would then try to identify which area of my body was connecting to the emotion. It would be some area that did not feel quite comfortable with the rest of me. I would then stay with the emotion, focusing on that area of my body, and shut down any thinking that followed. Something happened to me once that is forever memorable. I was focusing on my solar plexus region. This is where I was experiencing the emotions. I managed to completely shut out my thoughts for a brief period. It was not even a full minute. Suddenly, I experienced and heard the most powerful volcanic explosion in my solar plexus. I remember poking the area with my fingers. I was convinced that there was a crater there. For a moment, I thought that my fingers would have direct contact with my internal organs. In that brief moment, every memory I had with my mother exploded out. I called her shortly afterwards. I told her of a particular memory that had flashed before me. It was a situation where someone had embarrassed her. I need to digress here a little, as connections to other issues in my life also changed with this event. As a father, I was always fearful whenever my boys, as kids, would run around other people's furniture. I would become anxious that they would break something. I knew that it was my anxiety. Most of the people we were visiting would not be upset. I knew this, but still could not get the fear out of my mind. During this experience in my solar plexus, a memory came to me. A person asked my mother to take the kids out of the living area. She did not want us to mess up her furniture. Those were her actual words. I felt the deep embarrassment that my mother felt. I experienced it as my own. It was similar to the situation with the woman and the flat tire. I called my mother and she clearly remembered the incident. She talked about how she relived it repeatedly. She disclosed about how embarrassing it still felt. What surprised her most was my recounting of it. She said that I was a little baby in her arms. She remembered telling herself that she was grateful that I was too young to experience the incident. Since then, I lost all my anxiety around my kids and other people's furniture. I also used to manage my stress by feeling nauseous or pain in my solar plexus. I was investigated for a peptic ulcer previously. That disappeared as well. A visualization that has always been helpful was the elevator trip. When I would feel a negative emotion, I would identify it first. I would then imagine going up in an elevator. It would stop at a certain level. When the door opened, I would step out into an open space with my feelings. My thoughts I would leave in the elevator. I would watch the elevator door close and take my thoughts away. I remember stepping off the elevator. It was supposed to be an open space just filled with light. Suddenly, I was surrounded by nature. I was walking along a small path. At the same time, I was observing the story of Jack and the Beanstalk. For the sake of brevity, I will not go into the actual story. It is easily available to anyone. I saw Jack trading the cow for the magic beans. The cow was shown as sacred and fed people with its milk. The manure was used for fire. The cow provided labor to plow the fields or pull carts. It was considered an animal that helped support the livelihood of the family. Jack bartered a life force of the family for magic beans. His mother threw them out of the window. I understood that this was a metaphor. She was tossing them into another consciousness. The window represented the vortex between the two states. When Jack woke up, he saw that a huge tree had grown overnight and its top was in the clouds. It was on the other side of his window. In other words, it had evolved into another consciousness to which he had access. When Jack climbed the tree, he entered the kingdom of the giants. I understood then that the large giants were really representing a higher level of consciousness. Their energy was enormous compared to humans. They appeared larger compared to human life. Because he was not synchronized with the energy, he felt afraid. There was an abundance of wealth there. Jack encountered this with the goose and other objects that he took. However, the enormity of the situation scared Jack. He escaped down the tree and chopped it at the roots. It never grew again. I was shown how men would become overwhelmed and fearful of connecting with the higher consciousness. When this happened, men would destroy that which would make them richer. I have had many adventures with this visualization. These experiences would take place in a flash. Holding on to the emotions and shutting down the thoughts would trigger spontaneous insights. The message about Jack was the third reflection. It was hidden in plain sight and I had not seen it previously. When you harness your thoughts for even half a minute, you will begin to enjoy spontaneous journeys into different planes of consciousness.
Sad as I can be, there is always a song in my heart. I may not hear it, but it sings to comfort me. The Cosmic Game.